He was best known as the mastermind behind the Japanese surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. Today, we're going to look at the life, military career, and medals of Admiral Yamamoto. And we're going to do it right here in Japan. As we chart Yamamoto's extraordinary life, we're going to travel the length and breadth of the country. From his gritty hometown in the countryside to the imperial capital here in Tokyo, and an exotic navy base where you'll see battleships and submarines. So join me in a Japanese adventure as we follow the life of this World War II commander. Vilified by American wartime propaganda as the brains behind Pearl Harbor, and later immortalized in Hollywood films like Tora Tora Tora, Admiral Yamamoto remains an enigmatic figure. In this video, we uncover the real man behind the uniform and explore why he became such a revered figure in Japan. Yamamoto's family hailed from the city of Nagaoka in Honshu, Japan, roughly around 200 kilometers or so north of Tokyo. And we're going to jump on the bullet train there right now. The young Isoroku Yamamoto was actually born Isoroku Takano, and later, as an adult, would take on the Yamamoto surname when he was formally adopted into another samurai family. We'll explain that later. His father had originally been of samurai stock, belonging to the Nagaoka domain. The family was loosely equivalent, I'd say, to minor gentry. So this is the ruins of Nagaoka Castle, which was where the local samurai clan were based. And this was destroyed in the 1860s during the Meiji Restoration. When Japan modernized under the Meiji Restoration, many samurai lost their incomes and social status when the feudal system was abolished. Nagaoka Castle was destroyed by government forces after a samurai uprising known as the Boshin War in 1868. Apparently, the local samurai here even used Gatling guns during the conflict. Nowadays, the train station is built over much of the remains. The Takano family and Isoroku's father would struggle financially, and his dad would work as a school teacher and Confucian scholar to make ends meet. In April 1884, Yamamoto was born at this very spot here. The house you can see behind me is a modern recreation of the actual home that he was born in, which was destroyed many years later. When Yamamoto was born, his father was 56 years old. Isoroku is an old Japanese reading of the number 56, chosen to commemorate his father's age. In contrast to many officers he would later serve with, Yamamoto attended the public school system rather than receiving a formal samurai-based education, public school being state school in this sense. This would benefit Yamamoto as he would be exposed to a modern curriculum, which in turn would make him more open-minded and willing to embrace change and innovation, in contrast to more reactionary officers he would later serve with. At school, he would be teased about his poverty, though the young Yamamoto would see education as the key to advancement and was extremely diligent and hard-working in class. At school, he would begin a lifelong fascination with America after reading a memoir or biography of Benjamin Franklin. By the time Isoroku was born, his father was on his third marriage, having been a widower, and he was part of an extended family of 5 brothers and 2 sisters. His oldest brother was 32 years older than him. Yamamoto stood at 5'3", and he would blame his lack of height on his poor childhood and not being able to eat enough decent food. Age 17, he would apply for the Naval Academy. He would be placed second among 200 successful applicants who entered. He would then spend 3 years training on land and then graduate in the top third of his class in November 1904 and spend 1 year with further training at sea with the rank of midshipman. During his time at sea on the training ship Kanzaki Maru, the Russo-Japanese War broke out. Yamamoto was transferred to the armoured cruiser Nishin when there was a shortage of sailors. Engaging the Russian fleet during the Battle of Tsushima, Yamamoto's ship was in the thick of the fighting and received heavy damage. During the battle, Yamamoto would be injured when the ship's forward turret exploded. The injuries would leave him with much scarring. He received a severe flesh wound on his thigh, scarring on his lower body, and had his index and middle finger severed from his left hand. Yamamoto was lucky, however, as had he lost another finger, he would have been medically discharged from the Navy. In an example of dark military humour, from then on, Yamamoto would be nicknamed 80 sen. At the time, a manicure would cost 10 sen per finger, so 100 sen for a 10-digit person. For Yamamoto, however, 80 sen. Although wounded during the battle, Yamamoto remained at his post, and after the battle was commended by the commanding officer of the fleet, Admiral Togo, who hopefully we'll cover later in a video. Yamamoto would receive a 1904-05 Russo-Japanese War Medal, known as the Meiji 3738 War Medal. For the next few years, Yamamoto would serve on several ships, including the Battleship Kashima. He would also attend courses on naval gunnery, which he was specialised in, and go to torpedo school. With the Navy, he would visit the ports of Shanghai, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Vancouver, Seattle, and even Melbourne in Australia between 1908 and 1910. In June 1910, Yamamoto's ship would even visit Singapore, which over 30 years later the Japanese would invade and conquer from the British. One important point: these runs ashore and international visits conducted by the Navy in the first part of the 20th century would leave the Japanese Navy far more cosmopolitan and internationally minded than their army colleagues, many of whom didn't travel very far and mostly were deployed to Korea or Formosa, Taiwan, or even China. Therefore, many senior army officers would have a more insular and increasingly ultra-nationalistic outlook, believing Japan had a special destiny to lead Asia, and simply writing off Western democracies as weak and ineffectual. Yamamoto would then spend time as an instructor on the training ship Soya and finally get to go to Naval Staff College and graduate in 1916. During World War I, Yamamoto would also serve as adjutant at Yokosuka Naval Base Headquarters. Both his parents would pass away around 1913. Aged 32, Takano, as he was then known, was offered formal adoption into the prestigious Yamamoto samurai clan. This was a fairly common practice at the time, ensuring prominent families would have a male successor, and the surname would continue. Accepting the formal adoption, Isoroku would trade his surname, Takano, for Yamamoto from then on. This is the Shinano River behind me. Perhaps in his youth, Yamamoto fished in the river. He would maintain close ties to Nagaoka, returning frequently to visit his brother, who still lived in the city. In late 1916, Yamamoto would contract a double whammy of typhoid and appendicitis, and remained off active duty until the summer of 1917. Still in recovery, he would be assigned a shore-based posting at the Naval Ministry in Tokyo. During this time, he would marry Ryoko Mahashi, and they would have 4 children. His wife hailed from a samurai family also, who had become dairy farmers. After a short stint on the light cruiser Kitakami, in 1919, as a naval representative, Yamamoto would be sent to the United States. Travelling to Boston, he would take an English language summer course, and keen to quickly enhance his skills, during the evenings would hire an English private tutor to learn further English conversation and advance quicker. He would then enroll during the autumn semester at Harvard University. Promoted lieutenant commander in December of that year, learning English quickly, he decided to travel and explore America extensively and toured factories, oil and industrial facilities, primarily in the region now known as the Rust Belt. Some of this travel was allegedly financed by Yamamoto's poker winnings playing at Harvard. In his spare time, he loved playing cards, chess, reading poetry, and practicing calligraphy. From May 1920, he would work in the Japanese embassy in Washington, assisting the ambassador preparing material. After witnessing the vast potential of America's industrial capacity, Yamamoto would become doubtful of Japanese success in any future armaments race with the Western powers. He stated, "Anyone who sees the auto factories in Detroit or the oil fields in Texas knows that Japan lacks the national power for a naval race with America." Later promoted to commander, his USA trip would leave Yamamoto with a fascination for studying aviation as well as the mechanics of oil and fuel systems. Returning to Japan, Yamamoto would then be assigned a post as an instructor at Staff College. From now on, his English skills would become increasingly useful to the naval top brass, and he would spend more of his time on shore-based staff roles or accompanying senior admirals on diplomatic missions or as an embassy attaché. Now speaking fluent English, Yamamoto would be once again sent to America, to Washington as a naval attaché, and assisting admirals and other Japanese delegates during negotiations at the Washington Naval Conference. Whilst abroad, Yamamoto would be promoted to captain in 1923. He would also be part of a Japanese delegation who visited the United States War College. In 1924, Yamamoto would change his speciality from gunnery to aviation. Although older than most men in this new and exciting branch, Yamamoto would learn to fly, although he would never see service as a pilot. From now on, he would be a major advocate of the air arm and continually press for innovation. Doing so, he would butt against the naval old guard, who had a very different philosophy, and we'll explain that later. Yamamoto's first command would be a short stint on the cruiser Isuzu in 1928, followed by the aircraft carrier Akagi. Of commanding sailors and pilots, Yamamoto would state, "Show them, tell them, have them do it, and then praise them. Otherwise, people won't do anything." During his time commanding the Akagi, Yamamoto would oversee intensive training by the fledgling Japanese Naval Flying Corps. There would be accidents during the training, and Yamamoto would regularly attend shrines and temples to pray for those who had died. He would gain a reputation as a commander who cared about his men's welfare. In 1930, he would participate as a special assistant to the Japanese delegation during the London Naval Conference regarding disarmament. Many hardliners wanted to walk away and break from the treaty, but Yamamoto realized that in the long term this would not be beneficial for Japan, as it could encourage other powers with more industrial potential like America to produce far more ships and submarines than Japan. Yamamoto would also attend similar talks in the mid-1930s. And again, although advocating to remain in the treaty, the increasingly hardline Japanese government refused to sign further treaties. And although disagreeing with their decision, Yamamoto could essentially only follow orders and relay his government's decision to other delegates. Naturally, being a sailor, Yamamoto liked to party and have a good time. He was known as being a gregarious man who also enjoyed playing cards and gambling. Not exactly a stay-at-home family man, washing the car on a Sunday morning and cutting the lawn, Yamamoto was known for being a bit of a ladies' man and having a string of mistresses, including geishas. Promoted Rear Admiral for 3 years, Yamamoto would be Director of Naval Aeronautics. He would work to strengthen Japan's aviation industry, applying knowledge gained during his tours of auto plants in America. Yamamoto would encourage his technicians to learn foreign aircraft designs and then adapt, improving them with indigenous designs. During one visit to England, he would return to Japan via the Trans-Siberian Express and would stop off in Germany, where an exchange of information would occur between the two countries. Germany would agree to exchange knowledge of dive bombing techniques for Japanese information about aircraft carrier construction, which the German Navy was mulling over during the 1930s. And speaking of Germany, ironically, on the day of our visit to Nagaoka, the city was in full swing, hosting a German-themed Oktoberfest-style beer festival. I wasn't expecting bratwurst and lederhosen on a Yamamoto trip, but there you go. History has a funny way of serving up those little coincidences. If you're interested in learning more about the wartime relationship between Germany and Japan, I've actually made a previous video exploring the remarkable story of German U-boats operating alongside the Japanese in the Far East, and we travelled to Malaysia and Singapore during that video. I'll leave a link at the end. And going back to Yamamoto, it's during this time that two factions or cliques would emerge in the Navy. One faction in Japan's naval leadership believed in the power of the battleship. Their experience of success during the Battle of Tsushima led them to believe that any future war with a major power would be decided by one climatic and pivotal high seas battle conducted by battleships fighting each other toe-to-toe. Therefore, Japan should build more advanced battleships. Yamamoto's faction believed this viewpoint to be folly, and that air power and carrier-based warfare was the way ahead. With modern fighters and bombers upgrading in technology in the 20s and 30s roughly every 3 to 5 years, Yamamoto believed a battleship once built would be increasingly vulnerable, with its anti-air defences being outdated very quickly. Money would be better spent on fleets of aircraft carriers. Without investment in comprehensive air defence, a battleship was more an encumbrance than an offensive weapon. An innovator, Yamamoto early on saw the potential for naval aviation above battleships, and he would state, "Japan has always regarded the aircraft carrier as one of the most offensive of armaments." Rather than choose one doctrine over the other, the Imperial Japanese Navy probably pursued the worst option, which was compromise. It continued to invest heavily in battleships, whilst simultaneously attempting to expand its naval aviation arm and building a powerful carrier fleet. Having limited resources, neither side would be fully satisfied. As a result, Kure Naval Arsenal would become one of Japan's most important military-industrial centres, and you can see it here. Already a major naval base, it was expanded to construct the Navy's largest and most advanced warships, including in the 1930s construction of the colossal Yamato-class battleships. And we'll touch on that in a bit, but as you can see today, Kure is still an active naval base for the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces. To add further division to the Japanese military, in the 20s and 30s, increasing nationalism would split the army and navy over foreign policy. The army believed that they should prioritise expanding the empire in East Asia. The navy should play second fiddle to them and transport them around during their offensives. The navy saw themselves, however, as the top dog, pushing for a powerful blue water fleet to protect trade routes and dominate the Pacific. The increasingly bellicose army believed Japan needed her place in the sun and should push the weak Europeans and Americans out of Asia. Remember, many of these army chaps had had very limited travel experience and based their views on the West on the Russo-Japanese War. However, the United States in the 1920s, or even the British Empire, was very different to Tsarist Russia. In contrast, Yamamoto and many others of the naval leadership had a healthy appreciation for the military potential of the Western powers. Throughout the interwar period, radical junior officers in the Japanese military would carry out acts of intimidation and even assassinations against politicians and military figures, who they deemed as moderate. In 1936, militant nationalists in the army would even carry out a failed coup. Yamamoto would oppose Japan's invasion of northeast China in 1931 and the escalation of the conflict in 1937. In September 1938, Yamamoto received a wound badge, presumably for his injuries sustained during the Battle of Tsushima over 30 years before. Like General MacArthur and the Purple Heart, Yamamoto would be one of, if not the, first person to receive this award in Japan. Apparently, he would treasure this award over all other medals and would try to inspire others with stories about how he overcame his disabilities. After commanding the 1st Carrier Division, Yamamoto would be promoted to the office of Deputy Navy Minister. In that position in December 1937, Yamamoto would publicly apologize to the US ambassador to Japan when the USS Pernai was attacked by the Japanese Air Force in China, killing 3 American sailors. Yamamoto would be sent to the US Embassy in Tokyo to explain the incident to the US ambassador. And he would be extremely candid, stating, either the commander of the army boat did not report the attack to Japanese Army headquarters, or that the headquarters hid it. Yamamoto, from then on, would be targeted with death threats from more radical or extremist nationalist elements within the military. Attending official ceremonies and formal audiences, Yamamoto, as one of Japan's most senior military commanders, would occasionally attend the Imperial Palace, and you can see the grounds behind me. Believing it not in Japan's national interest, Yamamoto would also oppose the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, signed in 1940. This further angered radical nationalists, and for his own safety, to protect him from assassination attempts, he was packed off to a sea deployment, away from Tokyo as Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. Increasing economic sanctions on Japan in 1940 would lead the government of Japan to choose military expansion over withdrawal from China, and for Japan to assess that conflict with larger powers was unavoidable. When the Japanese leadership decided to go to war with Western powers, Yamamoto believed it to be a bad idea, but he was tasked with planning naval strategy for the war. With the Navy the biggest consumer of oil in Japan, Yamamoto realized that it was crucial to secure the Dutch East Indies in order to guarantee the supply. He understood that Malaya and the Philippines would need to be captured in order to accomplish this. Yamamoto believed that Japan could not win a sustained war against the United States, so a decisive blow would be needed to give the Japanese military 6 months freedom of movement to take Western colonies throughout Southeast Asia. This blow would also be designed to give the Americans such a psychological shock as to bring them to the negotiating table and end the war. In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success. Yamamoto concluded that the only available option would be to attack the main US naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and it was to be done with maximum force. The Japanese leadership at first rejected Yamamoto's idea, deeming it too risky, and on the eve of Japan's most consequential war, incredibly, Yamamoto threatened to resign unless he got his way. The government caved. Travelling around 3,500 nautical miles, conducting successful replenishment at sea, and remaining undetected throughout the voyage, under Yamamoto's leadership, the Japanese carrier strike force achieved one of the most ambitious naval surprise attacks in history. Reflecting on Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto would state, "A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply for the one smitten." Although Pearl Harbor was considered a tactical success in that the Japanese sank or destroyed 8 US battleships, they failed to account for any US aircraft carriers, the submarine force, infrastructure around Pearl Harbor itself, and even failed to significantly damage or impact the light and heavy cruiser force. Although Yamamoto's attack achieved its objective of giving Japan a 6-month window to launch its assaults across Southeast Asia, it ultimately failed to cow either the US government or the American people into accepting a negotiation or early finish to the war. Just a couple of months after Pearl Harbor, in February 1942, the battleship Yamato became the flagship of the combined fleet, with Admiral Yamamoto transferring his command aboard. During the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Yamamoto, on the bridge of Yamato, that's a tongue twister, directed the operation from hundreds of miles behind the main carrier strike force. Yamamoto hoped to lure the American carriers into a decisive trap, but he fatally weakened his own plan by dispersing his forces across the Pacific, pursuing multiple objectives. Unaware that Japan's naval codes had been broken, he did not know that the US Navy was fully prepared for the attack. The result was a crushing defeat. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers in addition to many of her best pilots, whilst the Americans ultimately lost only Yorktown, 1 carrier. In the aftermath of Midway, Yamamoto again faced criticism for his leadership during the Guadalcanal and Solomon Islands campaign. He committed his naval forces in penny packet or piecemeal operations, rather than concentrating them for a decisive engagement, a strategy that further eroded Japan's shrinking naval strength. After defeating the Solomons, Yamamoto would write in a letter, "The USA is much more tenacious than Japan in terms of its national strength and the people's determination." Nevertheless, the American High Command still regarded Yamamoto as Japan's most capable naval commander and a formidable opponent. Convinced that his loss would be a major blow to the Imperial Japanese Navy, they decided to eliminate him. On the 18th of April 1943, Yamamoto set out on an inspection tour of the Solomon Islands, determined to boost the morale of frontline troops. Although warned that the journey carried significant risks, he insisted on making the trip, believing it was his duty to visit the men under his command. On leadership, Yamamoto would state, "Sincerity can sway the minds of men. Nothing is more important than sincerity." Unbeknownst to him, American codebreakers had intercepted his itinerary. In a carefully planned ambush codenamed Operation Vengeance, US Army Air Force P-38 Lightnings intercepted his aircraft over Bougainville. The bomber was shot down and crashed into the jungle. It's widely believed that Yamamoto was killed almost instantly after being struck in the head by machine gun fire from the attacking fighters. When Japanese search parties reached the crash site the following day, they found his body seated upright against the trunk of a tree, still wearing his white gloves, with his katana or samurai sword resting beside him. His remains were recovered and returned with full military honours to Japan aboard the battleship Musashi. Following a state funeral in Tokyo, Yamamoto was cremated, and his ashes were divided between the Tamarian Cemetery in Tokyo and his family grave in Nagaoka. We're finally at the cemetery, so let's see if we can find the Admiral's grave. And here, in the suburbs of western Tokyo, is the tomb or grave of Admiral Yamamoto. To get here, it took me a couple of hours on the public transport system from central Tokyo, where all the tourists are. And if we walk up here, beside Yamamoto's tomb, is the tomb of Admiral Togo, who hopefully we'll be doing a video on soon. And I got this confirmed off the information centre at the cemetery. If you come in the summer, just watch out for the mozzies, which are making a feast of my legs. Posthumously, Yamamoto would be honoured with the rank of Marshal Admiral of the Japanese Navy, loosely equivalent of Admiral of the Fleet for the Royal Navy or Fleet Admiral for the US Navy. During my visit to the Admiral Yamamoto Memorial Museum, sadly, photography and filming were not permitted inside, and of course I had to respect those rules. The museum itself is a small but fascinating site where visitors can view relics such as aircraft wreckage, including a wing section and seat recovered from the crash. The memorabilia on display includes his personal effects such as a family doll named Masumi that is said to have given him comfort, as well as correspondence with friends and family. Among those are letters in which Yamamoto expresses concern over shortages of aircraft and growing worry about the future of his hometown. There is also a range of Yamamoto-themed merch on display, and the museum appears to support charitable links with communities in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, I believe, which are connected to wartime history. Just outside, in the car park, stands a Japanese maple tree, said to have been Yamamoto's favourite. In recent years, it was reportedly dug up and relocated to the museum grounds, where it now stands as a quiet and somewhat unusual memorial. As part of the slightly stranger merch, the museum sells Yamamoto Navy curry, a dish that the Admiral is said to have enjoyed. Although it's well off the usual tourist trail, the museum is well worth a visit for those interested in the Pacific War and Yamamoto's legacy. Although the staff are really friendly, they speak little English, but do hand you an English pamphlet or guide which you can take with you around the museum with all the information in. Symbolically, after his death, Yamamoto was awarded the German Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves and swords to recognise his outstanding military leadership. Interestingly, he was the only non-German during the whole war to be honoured with swords in addition to oak leaves. Furthermore, Japan awarded him posthumously the Grand Cordon of the Supreme Order of the Chrysanthemum, Japan's highest decoration. Over his career as well, Yamamoto received the Order of the Sacred Treasure for long and meritorious service, and multiple classes of the Order of the Golden Kite, awarded for bravery and combat leadership. We will be covering future Japanese military leaders, so for the sake of time, we won't discuss them in detail in this video, and we'll do it in a future one. And what became of Yamamoto's hometown? An industrial city, Nagaoka was devastated on the 1st of August 1945 when it was firebombed by the US Army Air Force. Tragically, nearly 1,500 people would die in the attack. Later, an annual fireworks event would be held on the date of the bombing, a massive tradition of peace that still goes on today. In Japan, he remains a respected and in some circles revered figure, admired for his naval leadership and for recognising the immense risks of war with the United States. That said, Yamamoto's insistence on adapting a more aggressive operational strategy in the Pacific has been criticised by some historians, who argue that a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor made any negotiated settlement with the US impossible, as enraged American public opinion would simply not allow for it, and would likely press for Japan's unconditional defeat. Although the Japanese government didn't know it at the time, their general consensus and assumption that the US would go to defend European colonial possessions in the Western Pacific was flawed. The United States may not have intervened had they not been attacked. Domestically, many Americans did not want to risk their own boys' lives for other countries' empires. The Pearl Harbor attack, however, provided a divided America with a clear war aim. Mark Still, in his book on Pearl Harbor, would state, "A war which could have been fought for the limited goal of seizing Dutch and British possessions in the East Indies and Malaya was instantly transformed into a total war against the most powerful nation on earth." Personally, I think Japan would have struggled to win regardless of the strategy it adopted, as it seems likely that the US and Japan would eventually have come to blows in the Pacific, and Yamamoto could only really plan with the limited tools he had at his disposal. Ultimately, Yamamoto had been dealt a losing hand to begin with, starting a major war of attrition against the world's biggest industrial power and also the world's largest empire. A gambling man, he appeared to understand that, and stoically went ahead with his government's aims as best as he could. Well, let me know if you're a fan of Yamamoto or not, and as a strategist, could he have done better? Could he have defeated the United States and the United Kingdom? Let me know in the comments. Just a quick note as well before we sign off. In Japanese, family names are traditionally given before first names, so Admiral Yamamoto would formally be referred to as Yamamoto Isoroku, not Isoroku Yamamoto. For the sake of consistency and to avoid confusing viewers and the YouTube algorithm, I've used the Western name order throughout the video. According to my analytics, I don't appear to have any subscribers from Japan, so hopefully it won't confuse anyone there. But if you're watching from Japan, do let me know in the comments. And apologies for any mispronunciations. I have tried my best. I have found this language quite difficult though. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one.